Welcome to the Campaign Trend Podcast, where you're joining in on a conversation with the entrepreneurs, operatives, and experts who make professional politics happen. I'm your host, Eric Wilson. Joining me today is Matthew Hanauer, co-founder of Civly, a campaign intelligence platform built around AI research. Matt's background is in research methods. He has a PhD, and a lot of his work lately is on synthetic polling, simulating an electorate of individual voters and then seeing what those voters have to say and comparing them to actual election results and polling. He recently ran a synthetic poll on the closely watched 2026 Maine Senate race, and we'll get into some of the results from that and see where AI polling can fit into our campaign toolbox. So the question we're really wrestling with today is, when can you trust a poll when no human ever picked up the phone? And we've been talking about this a lot on the podcast, and I'm really fascinated about it. So excited to talk to Matt about that today. Matt, before we get into the main numbers, let's kind of give people an orientation who may not be familiar yet with the synthetic poll or AI polling. And you didn't talk to a single voter. You built a simulated panel of, 4,597 real Maine registrations, and then you asked AI how each one would lean on the survey instrument. So walk us through what's actually happening there. What's driving that vote, if you will?
Yeah, because we have a real state voter file. So one of the things I want to differentiate, because sometimes I think we've been thinking about the name and whether that's a misleading name. We aren't making up stuff about people. We aren't just asking AI, "What do you think?" And we are giving it real information about, like you said, real registered voters. So we're giving it their demographic information, any education, their back, if they make any donations, and in some cases things like social media. We partner with L2 on this, and then we have our own big list of different data sources, and we put together basically a dossier of a person, a bunch of information that is publicly available. That's another important differentiation I want to bring out. We don't try to hack into anybody's private accounts, and we don't try to hack into your text messages and stuff. And I'll talk about why that could be a weakness of ours as well, but it's an important weakness that we will continue to have. So this lot relies on people's public information. And so we put all that in there. And then what we do is we ask AI, hey, given your information that you know about this person, how do you think they would vote in whatever question we're asking, or how do you think they would respond to this message? And in some cases, we can be more accurate in others. For example, when there is a clear answer, like when there's a 2024 election or where there's a previous election when we're doing a horse race, we can do back testing, and we can say, hey, we give them the information. We only give information that happened from that year before. We don't want to dilute it or poison it with information that happened in the future before that back test. And that's something that folks will do. And when you get really, really accurate results, like you're 100% right, that means that you did something wrong. Every data scientist, AI person who has been doing this for a while knows when you have, a 100% accuracy that you screwed something up. No one's ever that accurate. So we take that information, plug it in there. And if we're doing like a back testing, which is basically just seeing, can we predict the past? Because that is how these models, all of your data science, traditional ML models, that's the way they do it. There are some weaknesses to that because we know 2024 is not the same as 2026, but that's the best way we have to be able to say, hey, when I did this in 2024 results, I was, for the main one, we were plus or minus 4 points off from what happened before. And so we're able to get a level of accuracy, which is different. One of the other things that I've noticed gets a little confused is the difference, what a margin of error is, and then kind of what our accuracy is. So the margin of error is really just a function of how big your sample size is, and it says how precise you think this estimate is. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be accurate. So kind of the way I explain this is I play tennis. I can be really, really precise at hitting the ball in the net. That That is not good. If you haven't played tennis before, you want to hit the ball over the net. And I could be very precise at that, but I would be wrong and lose all the time. What we do is and with these back testing, we try to see how accurate are we? How accurate were we to the actual result? And so for the example for that, if I'm serving, we are pretty good. We are very good at hitting it in the box. Sometimes I hit it to the left side or the right side of the box, but we are very good at getting it in that box at some point. And sometimes we're a little bit off, but generally, like for example, we're in the right direction. We did some analysis for where we posted some of our results for New York and Maryland. And in that example, we were 9 out of 10. We got the one wrong that I think most people did. It was one of the ones that was a surprise in New York. But we've go ahead.
Yeah. So here's something that I learned from Ben Leff at Verisight, who wrote a paper on this, as you're probably familiar with, and we had him on the podcast, that AI polling really struggles when it's current events. And I can't think of a race that has more turmoil in it than the main Senate race and the different candidates. But what you were doing is you were sort of taking these, I guess, like 9 candidates that could potentially, run against Susan Collins, then looking at the previous elections using the same model. I guess how do you know that this method is capturing reality and not just getting lucky a few times? It's like the 2020 race, I think your model had it +1. Collins actually won it by 9. So I think that's something we got to address.
One other thing, when we did our kind of big back testing, when we did the 2024 election and some ballot measures, we did that for, I think, 293 different counties. So basically, we did 293 different tests to be able to see how accurate we were. And so for these, I try to do, as many tests at as many counties and try to predict as many counties as we can to see how accurate we can get. So we try and do not just, hey, we got one thing right. We try to see, can we get all these different counties right? But one of the big things we found is the way we ask the question. When we go through, we ask it. You would ask several questions in a row. And when we ask the question yes or no, one of the things that these models do is they get really, really extreme. They get, 100% yes and 100% no, especially on really, really hot topics.
Yeah, which is not how actual people think about things. Yeah,
exactly. So one of the ways we've been able to help and get around that, and that's why we've been able to get some more accurate results, is we ask AI on a scale of 1 to 10. And then we start to get some variation for folks, and then that ends up averaging out and getting us a little bit closer to reality. But yeah, when we get into extreme situations, another one I did last night, we were, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, we were looking at the North Carolina race. And one of the new things I'm wanting to do is not just ask it one model, but I want to ask it from different models, because every model has its own worldview and its bias. Like, I like Claude. I think Claude tends to go, to my worldview and my biases, and it's great for what I do. But not everyone uses Claude. And in fact, most people don't use Claude. They use ChatGPT. And so I think it's also really important and can help us get more accurate and get different types of worldviews and get to different types of current events in there by asking different models. So when we asked it, who was going to win the governor's race, I think whatever race Mark Robinson was in, it was like Mark Robinson was going to lose by a landslide. And he did lose by 14 points, but the model was predicting like 68. He was going to lose by 68 points or something. And then other model, which was interesting, other models that we ran with like DeepSeek and some other ones had him losing like by 5 or 6. And so one of the things I found, doing this recently is it can help when we get some of these current events or these volatile events, if you run it across different models, and then it can give you an early indicator of maybe the case that is just too volatile. Like in that case, I probably wouldn't have put the poll out for North Carolina because I had models all over the place. They were ranging from -68 to +5. And so in that case, I would either need to do a lot more work or just say, hey guys, this isn't going to be for us for this model. It's too volatile.
Yeah. And I don't want to be too hard on the AI polling thought, because I think it is telling us something. The challenge is for those of us in the field working on campaigns is we just don't know what it's telling us yet. So I think sort of the same way about prediction markets, right? There's useful data in there. We just aren't sure how to use it. And I think it's particularly useful in this case where you're back testing it on election results. Of course, it gets really difficult when we're trying to back test it on messages and opinions rather than behavior. This comes up in every conversation I have with AI, where on one hand we say, look, we can't afford to do a poll. And on the other hand, hey, talking to real people over the telephone is the gold standard of polling. And, it's going to cost you a lot of money to do that. So the decision in reality is not AI poll or a human poll. It's a human poll or no poll. And that's where AI comes in. And so where do you think it should fit in, I guess, right now?
Yeah. So where we're really excited about it is for down ballot races where it wouldn't be feasible. You couldn't get enough people on the phone. And so for folks, like you said, the no poll or poll, we really think this can be really helpful because there are some limitations with real polls. You have to get people to pick up the phone. People don't want to pick up the phone. And the people who pick up the phone are specific types of people. There are response biases, and this has been a problem in polling since the beginning of time. The people who pick up the phone are systematically different than the people who don't pick up the phone. With the polling we're doing, everybody has to pick up the phone. They don't have a choice. They're getting polled randomly. The neat thing about this too is we can pull any sort of, and we can get really, really deep into the crosstabs. Like we can go 4 or 5 levels deep. Whereas with the traditional poll, that's really, really difficult and really, really expensive. So I think there's 2 things. One is the simple one. Down ballot races would never be able to afford the poll. They would never be able to do the message testing. And so we can do things like some of this back testing to be able to say, whether or not we feel confident or this is going to be accurate enough. We can always choose not to do the poll. Like if we do the back testing and the analysis and we see that we cannot get accurate results, we can always choose not to do it. So that's one area where we can help down ballot races. The other area is to supplement and complement. It's really tough to get good random samples of all kinds of different people. You have to weight them differently, and you do a bunch of statistical analyses that you really don't want to have to do, but you have to be able to get those samples equal. And so instead, we can just sample how we want, and then we can ask as many questions as we want. One of the neat things about these polls is our respondents don't get tired. They don't have any fatigue. They don't have anything like that. And so we can ask them as many questions as we want. And so someone who wants to test 30, 40 different messages, which we've done before, because the first 20 there wasn't anything there. And then we thought, let's try something else. And then we were able to find, like, one of the things is for a candidate, we went back to their pre-politician history, and they were a nurse and had some healthcare background and did a lot of stuff. And that stuff really polled well. We didn't do it in the first round because we didn't think about it. But because it was relatively inexpensive and quick to be able to do that, we did that, and that polled really well for that individual. And so that's what we kind of put forward.
Yeah. I agree with the critiques of traditional survey research. I'm just very skeptical about how we measure all the various inputs that people get from media and their information diets, which is totally unique to them, which was not the case when the methodology was established. So I'm with you on that. This benchmark that you're using then, back checking on the previous election. So my question for you is, if the AI model, the synthetic sample, nails the sort of election result previously, what kind of confidence should we have that it's getting the new forward-looking messaging stuff accurate, or those totally different vectors that we shouldn't read into?
Predict. When I used to work in healthcare, we would try to be able to predict what someone's costs were going to be the next year. We would use the previous year. And so there are issues in that too. I always gave the example, I hurt my wrist one year and my healthcare costs went up. But you can include those sorts of things in your model where, I know Matt is young. He plays a lot of tennis. Younger, I guess I'm not as young as I used to be. Plays a lot of tennis. He does it. His history of injuries and chronic issues hasn't been a case. So we know from his entire profile, even though there was this one blip, that we know that we're not going to over-index on that one blip, and we'll probably assume his cost may go up a little bit, but not a lot for the next year. And that's kind of the same concept we can do here. We can build in, if we have lots and lots of years of history of data, to be able to see how these trends ebbs and flow, we can help build some security in what might happen in the future. But at the end of the day, yeah, it's the best we have. And if there are huge shifts and we don't have a variable in there that is accounting for that, then we could be off by more than we would like.
Yeah. You're listening to the Campaign Trend Podcast. I'm speaking with Matthew Hanauer, co-founder of Civly, about real-world applications of AI research. You did something really interesting here, which you called the honesty adjustment, because and so you do anchor things to a real poll. Can you just talk us through that and you found something interesting, which is adding more voter detail made you less accurate. We have consistently seen this now, where it's not necessarily the straight line of adding more data gets you better results. So walk us through both of those things.
That was surprising, because most of the time, I've been doing this for a while, and I've been doing it in other fields like healthcare and stuff. It's rare to see that more data made it less accurate, but I've seen that a couple of times since I've been now in politics. I haven't been in politics super long. I've been in politics maybe, since the start of this company. I've been predicting healthcare outcomes and things like that. And that was pretty rarely the case that more data didn't help. Usually what happens is more data just doesn't really add any value. And so, it doesn't make sense to really add it in, especially if it's missing all the time. So I actually bringing that up, that is one of the cases where we did see more data make it less accurate if you have, and this is kind of what happened with social media data. One of the cases, we added a bunch of social media data and it made it worse. And so for two reasons that could have made it worse. Most people don't have social media data. I know we talk about it a lot. We think about it. Most people aren't posting all the time on Twitter, Facebook, things like that. And so if you're missing a bunch of data, what it'll do is really overweight those people who do have it and really amplify what they're saying. And also, what I'm finding is with social media data, and this isn't a surprise, people aren't always honest on social media, and they tend to have a type of persona. So even though we think, all of this scraping and all of this data can really help, what I found in politics, and frankly what I found a lot when I was doing healthcare, is it generally comes down to 7 or 8 different factors that account for about 90% of the variation. It comes from, and really for politics, it's your basic demographics, education, race, things like that. Your voter registration, who you're registered for, where you live, things like that. That tends to predict about all of it. Donation history can help a lot. If we have it, because that can kind of tell if you're registered one way, but you're donating another way. Maybe you just haven't updated your registration. But those are kind of things that can help, and you can think about with when you're doing this type of analyses.
Yeah, I think that's such a fascinating point, because you would think that knowing more about a person will help you understand them, but in this case, it just does not add up. And I really do think it is because the political decision making is really kind of core to who you are, and who you are doesn't change. The big challenge, though, has to be figuring out who's going to turn out. I mean, that's a challenge for traditional modeling, traditional polling. I saw there was a study recently about the 2026 New York primaries compared to the turnout in 2025, and a lot of people who turned out for Zohran Mamdani did show up, but a part of it, and you couldn't really predict who was going to show up. It's just, I think that's the big wrinkle in all of this, is the randomness.
Yeah, I'm looking at, so we actually did some analyses on turnout. So we took a lot of the way I've seen in politics and what I've heard consultants say, and this is not a bad way to do it, but you brought up why it can be problematic. Usually it seems like the rule of thumb is someone's going to turn out if they voted in the last 2 elections. And I think that is a decent, solid like rule of thumb, a mnemonic kind of to go by. But we actually looked at that, and there was a metric in some of our data that L2 has that is kind of very similar to that. They take the percentage of how many people, how many elections they were eligible for, and then how many they voted in, and that was their metric. And it misses out on people like you were just talking about who come out every once in a while for a big race or something like that. And it also misses newly registered voters who are really excited to vote. So what we did was take the same model we took, except for we didn't use AI in the sense of I didn't throw it into a large language model. I used a traditional gradient, they call it gradient boosting model. It's just a traditional statistical model. And so we threw that in with all the factors that I was just talking about. And it was the same kind of factors, those 5-10 different factors of demographics, education, location. And we, along with did you turn out in the last elections, like that percentage. And then we put that in, and we were able to improve that accuracy. I'm looking at my results over here, about 6% in general election. And then in low turnout models, we were able to really improve by about 13, 14%. And so I think we can get more accurate with turnout. We just can't rely on did they come out the last election. That is definitely an important factor, but there are also a lot of other factors in there that can help us predict that better.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I've stopped talking about low propensity voters and instead call them infrequent voters, because it's not that they are disengaged. It's that just voting might not be convenient for them, and so whether they do their civic duty or not depends on what's the weather like, what's their schedule, what have they got going on.
Yeah.
One interesting thing about the social media data that I think is worth pointing out: social listening has been something that people have been selling me for decades, and we know about participation inequality, right? Which is the idea that for any given social network, you've got about 10% of people who are creating the content and interacting with the content and creating the signals. But 90% of people are just consumers, the sort of lurkers. And so if you are adding in social media data back to your model, or maybe relying on that more for a model, what you've done is you've just recreated the response bias of the people who pick up the phone. It's the hardest thing we have in polling right now is finding those people who don't want to share their opinions yet still vote. And so this is one of the ways to kind of imagine what they look like.
Yeah, I think this is probably our best way. It's really tough to get at those people. And like, you're exactly right. I hadn't thought about it that way, but yeah, the social media, adding that in is kind of the same exact thing, like you said, of just feeding that response of these are the people who engage. So I think social listening is really important. It's something that we do at our company, but we do it more for thing was said today that could help your candidate. Maybe somebody said something on a particular topic that is important for your candidate, and you can use it in whatever race you're doing. So I find it more useful for that, as opposed to if I haven't used it really much in any of my turnout models, just because it's so infrequent, and I don't know how honest it's being.
Yeah. So here, Matt, here's kind of my current model of how to understand AI polling in campaigns if I'm a campaign manager. And I want to get your honest assessment of this, not just as someone who sells this, but as someone who understands research methods. But it seems like I start from the position that we don't yet have enough pattern recognition to know, hey, this model is telling us this, and it's typically off by about this. And in the way that we know this about surveys, or, hey, the responses, you can look at a crosstab and say, oh, that Republican lean is not quite right, and in a subgroup. So we have that pattern recognition. I think that AI polling can tell us something. Again, we just don't know what exactly. So the two use cases I really see this for are bridging the gap between budget, right? So you're still going to want to try and do more traditional survey research, but in the times that you can't do that, here's a solution. And then two, for sort of testing out that survey and getting a read on it before you push it into the field, because I think a lot of people burn up budget on questions that come out, well, it's 50-50. And it's like, well, why do we spend all that time? And so there's an efficiency gain there. Do you think those are probably the two best ways that campaigns in 2026 should be using AI polling?
I think there's another one, but yeah, the second one you just described, the pre-poll, we did that for a client. Yeah, that was exactly what we were trying to do, is help them, because there's a limited set of things you can test. And so we were doing like that pre-poll cheaper. So we limited it down to, okay, here, the example I was giving you earlier where we went through like 50 of them so that they could ask 10 to 15 messages that we had some confidence and some data on, that those would be ones that would be important for them to ask. So that's definitely one. Yeah. The down ballot folks who can't afford it. I think, the follow-ups, like if you do 10, 15 messages, then, and you want to do more, and you want to do that follow-up, but you just you've spent all that money, it took all that time, and you didn't quite get what you wanted, but you want to keep following up those messages. I think it can be helpful for that if you're doing that in a time crunch. The thing that one of the things that's always going to be a weakness for this is what we talked about at the beginning. A lot of people are in group chats. They're on their group chats on their phone. They're on their texts. And that's where, a lot of our conversations have. I've mentioned I play tennis. I'm in a group of, and that's how I got started with this. I'm in a group of maybe 200 guys of about the same age, same level. And we have tons of group chats and all this stuff. And I'm on the court with guys, and we're at wing night and things like that. And now those types of conversations where, real honest conversations are happening about how people feel. I'm not going to get that with AI because it's not capturing that. That stuff is happening in person. And that's where real polls, that's why they're not going to go away. Real polls are going to be able to ask people how they're feeling. And those types of feelings can come out when you're asking them about that. And we will, if people are capturing that, then they're doing something fundamentally illegal, and they should never be doing that, because that needs to stay private. So that's why polls are always going to be around.
And I think this lands us in a really interesting spot, which is where we come back to with a lot of AI, which is we're never going to take the humanity out of understanding humans or creativity or, the voice of, say, a candidate. But what we can do is make the time being spent by humans more efficient. So in this case, we're only going to hopefully be going out and surveying the human beings for the things that only they can tell us, like, what's your opinion about this thing? And we can rely on the AI for some other element. So with that, I want to say thank you to Matt for a great conversation. You can learn more about his work and Civly in the show notes, including some links to some of their research, and sign up for a demo, learn more about them. If this episode made you a little bit smarter or gave you something to think about, that all we ask is that you share it with a friend or colleague. You look smarter in the process. They get smarter. They find out about the show. It's a win-win all around. Remember to subscribe to the Campaign Trend Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. And you can visit our website at campaigntrend.com for even more. With that, I'll say thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
The Campaign Trend Podcast is produced by Advocacy Content Kitchen, a media production company.